Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses number 85 this morning on Remembrance Day Sunday. Okay, so what have we got for you today? Well, the unambiguous DVSA shutdown of bike instruction turns out to be ambiguous. The AA are calling for road repairs to go ahead under lockdown. BMW are testing race bike parts made by 3D metal printing. Voxan and Max Biaggi have set a whole bunch of electric bike speed records. And we'll finish off with some better biking tips. We'll be looking at riding in fog. So sit yourselves down with your brew and ready for the next 20 odd minutes of topical news, controversial views, and the better biking tips. Okay, so let's start with the big news. Well, big news for me as a motorcycle trainer. Last week, the DVSA sent out what appeared to be a fairly robust and unambiguous statement, which basically shut down all training in England, car, bike, HGV and PSV for the duration of the lockdown. All tests were suspended too. But the important thing from my perspective is that it was the actual training which was being put on hold. Now, it didn't take instructors very long to realise that those trainees with tests on the day lockdown is released wouldn't have any time to practice, car and bike instructors, of course. And the other thing that affects motorcyclists is that anybody with a CBT that's about to expire wouldn't be able to renew it, leaving to either them choosing to ride around with no CBT or having to park the bike up and find some other way of getting wherever they needed to go. But the statement from the DVSA was clear. No ifs, no buts, no lessons. At least that's what it appeared to say. Then the Driving Instructors Association pointed out that it didn't appear to have been based on any directive issued by the government. And in that case, the DIA argued it wouldn't be binding. And they said they were chasing the DVSA for more information and that an update would follow. Now, that was all happening earlier in the week. I got the DIA update at 22:58 on Friday night, which shows you just how ad hoc all these arrangements actually are. Everything, it really is being done at the very last second. And what the DIA email said, and I quote this directly from their email: government reiterates lessons should not take place to help stop the spread of COVID-19 and to protect NHS workers. No critical worker priority tests and trainers are advised against critical worker lessons. Now, the key phrases there are should not and advised against. And very clearly, they fall short of must not and do not. Now, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, and the DIA themselves steered well clear of how to interpret those phrases. But anyway, that was Friday night. But over the course of the weekend, the plot has thickened. Yesterday evening and earlier this morning, what I found was that there were a number of instructors on a Facebook group for bike trainers who said they'd received updated advice from their local DVSA supervisors to the effect that they could make their own decisions on whether or not to follow the shutdown instructions. One email, which has appeared to have come from a local DVSA supervisor, said that the shutdown instruction was now being described as guidance. And an email is doing the rounds, which was sent out by the DVSA's public liaison department to a training school. And it says, once again, that training should not take place and that the school will need to decide whether to follow the guidance. It also states that that the writer from that department of the DVSA, the writer confirms that we will not close your business or remove instructor certificates should you continue training. So that's as clear as mud, really, isn't it? Predictably, there's nothing from the top tier of the DVSA. There's no actual further instruction, nor at the moment is there any advice from the DIA. The main response from most training schools seems to be a cautious wait and see approach, but it does seem that some CBT schools will be reopening on Monday. So if you are stuck with an expiring CBT, if you know anybody who is in that mess, get them to phone around because it will be possible, I very much suspect, to find somebody who will be doing CBTs somewhere in the country. Okay, so obviously all this applies to England, by the way. There are other rules in place in the other devolved nations. So if that's as clear as mud, here's something from the Snowball's Chance in Hell corner. The AA are proposing that the lockdown period be used to fix potholes. Reduced traffic means work could happen safely without causing congestion, says AA President Edmund King. Well, on the one hand, he probably hasn't looked out of his window, because if he had, he would have noticed that the traffic levels are pretty much normal. At least they are here in northwest London. The government says that they've already committed 2.5 billion for repairs, and they claim that this is part of the biggest nationwide programme ever announced. Of course, what they've also done is let the roads deteriorate to the worst state they've ever been in. So it's not surprising that they need a big programme to put it right. But according to the Asphalt Industry Alliance's survey of councils, the proportion of England's roads which are in poor condition has increased from 18% in 2017-2018 to 21% in 2019-2020. So the existing funding doesn't actually cover fixing existing potholes, let alone bring the roads back up to a standard where they're not going to fall apart next winter. The councils say 10 billion is actually needed to bring the roads back to scratch. So the government's cash injection is a long way short of what's actually needed. Don't expect roads to get any better anywhere near you soon. Right, okay, so what else to talk about? Well, I just need to set that photo up again. Where is it gone? Here it is. Yes, there we are. I've mentioned over the last few years, quite a few times on my Facebook page, the fact that 3D printing is coming down from the realms of the incredibly expensive to from niche market manufacturing to something you can do at home. And I don't know whether you noticed, but Aldi actually had a 3D plastic printer that hooked up to your own PC. And according to people who owned them, it was very useful for making small plastic parts. Okay, you're not going to build a motorcycle out of plastic just yet, but I have wondered, quite honestly, when people will start to manufacture small parts for their motorcycles. Something like an indicator or a side panel may be a possibility. I'm not an expert on the technology, but it would seem to be a reasonable use, and it would certainly undercut the costs of some of the parts, I would have thought. Anyway, the technology also allows you to 3D print with metal, and recently the price of 3D metal printers has been coming down too. Now, still not going to be something that you're going to be popping in your garage anytime soon, but some machines now cost as little as £100,000. So that does mean that it's affordable for businesses, and also for race teams, because BMW have apparently added a 3D metal printer to their World Superbike racing team pit. And what they're using this portable printer for is to manufacture prototype parts and try them out actually at the circuit. So what this actually does is it cuts down on a very long process by which a rider and a data logger identify a particular issue at the circuit the bike is being used on. The engineer then back at the factory analyzes the data. Somebody designs a new component to fix the problem. Simulations are run to see whether that part would do the job that they hope it to do. Eventually, they'll manufacture a trial piece that will be transported back to the team, who will then install it and finally test it. And of course, this takes a long time. What normally happens is that if a problem shows up at a particular circuit, the chances of getting a part back to the team for that race are non-existent. But the portable printer changes things. Now, with small parts that aren't subject to stress, they can be made on site in a matter of hours, and they can be used straight away during the race if the problem is detected in practice. BMW Motorsport Director Mark Bongers said, "This technology allows us to make improvements to the RR quickly and efficiently. The development of a World Superbike bike is an ongoing process, and it's often the minor details that make a motorbike better. Even the parts that can't be used directly on the bike from the printer can at least be designed and tested." And BMW have been able to use a new process. They used it at the double-header superbike races at Jerez and Portimao. They analysed data at Jerez, and then they calculated that a better shock link could be made. And they tested a 3D printed prototype at the circuit, and a new part was then manufactured and delivered to the circuit for the race at Portimao. So this is quite an exciting technology, actually, and it will be interesting to see how engineering workshops can use this and turn this to advantage too. So keep an eye open for printed parts for your motorbike coming to you soon. Right, okay, what else have we got for you? Well, don't forget, if you're watching ELEVENSES with Kevin Williams here of Survival Skills Rider Training, if you have any comments or questions on the content or any feedback at all, add yours and I'll get back to you at the end of the show via the comment stream here. Okay, next up, we have another photo for you. Then that's the one I wanted to show you. There we go. That's Max Biaggi there, and he's sitting on, as you can see, a Voxhand. Now, riding this particular electric motorcycle, the former GP racer Biaggi has set a total of 11 new world speed records for electric motorbikes. This was over at the Châteauroux airfield in France over the weekend of, not the weekend, the period October the 30th to the 1st of November. So 3 days at the airfield on the runway. And Biaggi rode semi and non-streamliner motorcycles, the ones that you see there. The one you see there is the semi-streamliner. And he achieved a fastest speed of no less than 408 kilometers per hour, which is 254 miles per hour. And that was on his way to a two-way average of 366.94 kilometers per hour, or 228.05 miles per hour. The record attempt was originally planned to happen in July on the world's largest salt flats, which are out in Bolivia. But that went the way of so much else this year. So what they did was they switched their attack on the records to the relatively short 2.17 mile runway at the Marcel Dassault airport in Châteauroux. And they took on the world record for the fastest electric bike. Now, the former holders were Mobitech, and they got a speed of 204 miles per hour at last year's Bonneville speed trial. So they Vauxhand have broken it fairly comprehensively. The non-streamliner bike also got a record. That was 349.38 kilometers an hour, or a fraction over 217 miles per hour. Again, a two-way run, and that was the average top speed. But they also set a total of 9 other records over the 3 days, which I won't read out. You can find them online if you want to look for them. Okay. Don't forget, you can always catch ELEVENSES Wednesdays and Sundays, normally at 11. We're a little bit late today because of its Remembrance Sunday. If you want to catch up, you can do that here on Facebook. You can also find my YouTube channel, which is Survival Skills UK, where all these shows are archived. And you can also follow them on Twitter, Instagram, and over on my Ko-fi page. And if you're keen to do so, you can always support me over there and gain access to a large number and a growing number of better biking articles. There's well over 200 up already, and more are going up all the time. So for a price for coffee, you can get a month's access to all those articles. And that brings me rather neatly to today's better biking tip. Now, according to Keats, this is the season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. I'm pretty sure Keats didn't ride a motorcycle, but it's not unusual at this time of year when we've got a spell of settled weather for fog to develop. And again, I can remember a couple of trips quite vividly, which were pretty dire rides. Years ago, only months into my riding career, in fact, I rode from Maidstone in Kent up to West Drayton near Heathrow. The ride took twice as long as I'd expected it to. It normally took me about 2 and a bit hours on my 125. This one took nearly 5 hours. And I very nearly didn't make it, actually, because I was kind of visually following the curb along the inside edge of the A40. And what I didn't notice was I drifted off the main carriageway onto a slip road. And I very nearly hit the Armco barrier on the corner. I was very lucky, actually, to get around the bend to actually bring the bike to a stop there. That was mostly because the fog was so thick. I was only riding at about 20 miles an hour, so stopping didn't take me very long. But that was how difficult it was to see where I was going. A few years later on, when I was a courier, I did what's probably still the worst journey I have ever done anywhere on any motorcycle. And it started off well enough. I picked a parcel up in London, and it was going out to GCHQ at Cheltenham. And at the time I picked it up, it was just after lunch. It was a lovely afternoon, lots of sunshine, sun relatively high in the sky for that time of year. And it took me a couple of hours, obviously, to get out to Cheltenham. And by the time I got there, it was actually coming down towards sunset. So it was a beautiful, beautiful evening to arrive in Cheltenham. And as I turned around, there was still some sun, but already I noticed a few wispy bits of fog on some of the bits which had been perfectly clear just a sort of half an hour or so earlier before I delivered the parcel off. And then, of course, as soon as the sun went down, the fog began to thicken as the temperature plummeted, and the ride turned into an absolute nightmare. Not only was the fog thick, so that I was dodging accidents, it actually started freezing on the visor, freezing fog. So basically, you couldn't see anything out of the visor. The traffic backed up everywhere. I remember getting stuck around Oxford for hours trying to get through that the ring road system there. By the time I got back into the fringes of London, where at least the fog thinned out and the temperature rose a bit, I was absolutely knackered and frozen as well. So I would honestly say that riding in fog, and particularly fog at night, is my least favourite activity on a motorcycle. And if I can, I simply don't bother. I will stay put. I won't even take alternative transport unless it's something like a railway train, because driving in fog is not fun either. But sometimes, as in the case where I'd set off in bright sunshine, it comes down and it catches you out. So you might have to do it. So what are the problems and how best to deal with them? Well, first of all, think about what kind of fog that you might be encountering. It can be low cloud. So if you're up in the mountains, you can get fog. You may be able to avoid that by going through the valleys. It can be blown in off the cold sea. So again, think about that. You might be able to take a route which is a little bit further inland. But this time of year, it's basically caused by cold air that's sinking into low-lying areas after a cold, still day. Kent, actually, where I lived for many years, used to get all three types at any time of the year. But this time of the year, seasonal fog is caused by moist air travelling over colder ground. Now, I don't know if you've been following the weather forecast, but if you have been, what you'll have noticed is that we're getting some particularly warm air coming up from the southwest. So it's warm, and that means it's got a lot of moisture in it. And if you've got a lot of moisture, you've got the long nights, and the ground will chill as soon as it gets dark, and that causes fog to form quite readily, much more so than this summer, or even, generally speaking, later on in the early part of the spring, later part of the winter. The problem is, of course, with the sun rising later, it can also be slow to clear, so it can last all day. So the first place to head is actually to look for the weather forecast. It's pretty damned obvious if you look out your window and it's foggy in the morning, but what's not so obvious sometimes is how the weather may change during the day, so that if you get a clear afternoon and the evening, then you may hit fog on the way home, even though it wasn't foggy in the morning. So, look at the forecast, find out what is due to happen. When you are riding, try to work out where you're likely to encounter fog so you're ready for it. Towns, generally speaking, are warmer than the surrounding countryside, so it's a usual problem that you drive out of town and straight into fog. Watch out for particular parts of the landscape which are prone to fog. Damp meadows and river valleys are absolute classic places for fog to form on still evenings. Watch out for patchy fog too. It may not seem like much of a problem as you're driving through it, but the trouble is you've got no idea if you'll encounter a thicker patch and how long it'll last if you do. So don't be tempted to blast down the road into a sort of wispy looking bit of mist drifting across the road, because it could be a lot thicker than you expect. Something that I find a problem sometimes with riding in fog is a kind of sense of dislocation. A road that we've ridden, dozens, maybe even hundreds of times before, all seems totally different in fog because all our normal visual cues have vanished. So use everything available. And something that I try to get over to people is that you've got those reflective posts. Now, they don't, at daytime, you don't even need to notice they're reflective, but what you will spot is that red posts are to your left, your near side, because they are supposed to represent the sort of rear light of a vehicle, which would be on your side of the road, and white posts, white markers, are on the opposite side, so they would be the equivalent of an oncoming headlight, for example. So you know that if you see a line of red reflectors lining up in front of you, then you are approaching a right-hand bend and vice versa. Triangular signs are there as well. A lot of people wonder why they're there. Sometimes they're there on bits of road where the hazard is blindingly obvious. Well, it is if it's not foggy. There's a wonderful road in Kent, which is dead straight. It's an old Roman road, goes for miles, and you can see all the junctions for quite a long way off, except when it's foggy, and that road really, really does get very foggy indeed. And all of a sudden, all those crossroad signs that you're coming across are giving you a really good heads up as to what's hidden in the fog just in front of you. Watch the centre line too. As soon as the markings go from short to long, well, I've still got Max Biaggi up. Let's take Max off the screen. I'm a bit bigger. From the short lines to the longer lines, what you have then is called the hazard line, and it just tells you that there's a hazard. You don't know what it is, but it means have a good look round and try and figure out what it is. If it goes solid, then there is some other issue. Possibly there's a bend in front of you that you can't see round. Possibly there is some kind of traffic island in the middle of the road that you need to dodge. It's worth knowing that the cat's eyes also get closer together. You'll pick that up in the headlight as well. So coloured cat's eyes also help at night on multi-lane roads. You'll know, I hope, that red cat's eyes on the dual carriageway are to the left, amber to the right, and white is between the middle of the lanes. And if you've got a green cat's eye, it means vehicles can leave or join the carriageway. Where to ride on a foggy bit of road? Well, the trouble with riding along the left edge is that you're liable to encounter things like parked cars or cyclists. You may also do what I did, which of course is follow the slip road off the main road without realizing it. So I tend to ride a bit right of centre because it keeps us further away from those dangers on the near side. But be cautious. A lot of riders will use cross-hatched areas as motorcycle overtaking lanes. Don't forget, you might encounter a turning vehicle in a refuge or a traffic island in the middle of that cross-hatched area. Something else to think about is that fog is water, so it makes the road surface damp, and that means a good following distance is necessary in case the surface gets slippery. What about at night? Well, a dip beam is something to put on in daytime, but as soon as it turns dark, if you try to use a main beam, what you'll find is it just lights the fog up and you can't really see very much. So you need a properly adjusted dip beam. It has to throw the light a reasonable distance ahead so you can see what's coming as best as possible, but not so high that it's the light's being bounced back as glare from the fog. And that's where extra bright lights can actually be a disadvantage. If you've actually got your fog lights or spotlights set up, because you're thinking that will help drivers see you, it can actually cause you problems of seeing where you're going in fog. So be cautious about that. Usually easy enough to see an oncoming car, of course, unless it's parked with no lights on, or occasionally you will meet somebody who decides they don't need to use lights. They can be a bit tricky to see too. But generally speaking, it's side on where we really have to be careful, because you're not going to see a car easily at a junction. You may pick up the headlights, you may pick up the tail lights, but if you're just looking at the side of the car, they can be quite tricky to see, particularly if somebody's not indicating. Tail lights are usually fairly easy to spot as well when we get close, and there's the trap, because if we follow somebody who runs off the road via their tail lights, we'll be off the road as well. So remember to drive to what you see, not what the bloke in front is seeing. And again, if you close up to a distance where you can see the tail lights, but it's inside your stopping distance, then obviously things can go badly wrong. Behind us, we've got no fog light. I think the only bike I can remember that ever came with a fog light was Norton. So the driver behind is likely to have trouble seeing our tail light. If you look at a lot of motorcycle tail lights, they've either got one bulb, or even if they've got a couple of bulbs, they tend to be pinpoints. They're very small. They don't give you a lot of surface area to light up. So our lights will tend to vanish against the brighter lights of cars ahead of us, particularly when drivers, of course, are driving automatics or manuals where they sit on the brake light at the back of the queue. That might help the driver behind see the car, but will tend to vanish in the glare. So have a think about that before you come to a halt behind the queue. If you do a lot of foggy miles, it may actually be worth fitting your own fog lights. I've certainly done that when I was out of town couriering and riding around in fog quite a bit. As an emergency measure, you might even be able to nip into a sort of bicycle shop or Halfords or something like that and actually get a bicycle LED light. They're pretty effective, although you shouldn't use them in flash mode because that is illegal if they're fixed to your bike. Clothing, what to wear? Well, it's hard to say what's the best colour really, because light colours tend to blend in daytime in fog. Dark colours, of course, tend to disappear at night. One thing that I will say is that little patches and stripes of high-vis colour on any garment is going to be useless in fog. What about reflective material? Because again, it's the kind of conditions when people put on their high-vis vest. Well, what I would say is that if you've got the reflective material up here on your shoulders, it's more or less useless, because people will be driving on dipped beam. And if you think where the dip beam's going, it's going down at floor level, not high up on your shoulders. So the typical high-vis vests with reflective material in that sort of H pattern over the shoulders and around the back really isn't actually all that much use on a foggy day. If you can put high reflective material on, the best place to have it is actually down around your ankles. Now you can get leggings with circles of reflective material around the ankles, and that really is the best place to have it on a foggy day. All right, okay, so that's pretty much it for today. I've run on for half an hour. So don't forget, you can catch up with the next show on Wednesday at 11. Anything else to say? Not really. Thank you very much for tuning in again. Don't forget, I'm still offering my online training courses, and I'm keeping a very close eye on what's going on with on-road training as well. So if you're interested in a on-road ride to work course, drop me a line, and what we'll do is we'll find out what's going on out there in the wider world and how we can run that course. Right, thank you very much indeed. You'll be watching Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training and ELEVENSES. I'll be back on Wednesday. But for now, thank you very much. Bye-bye.